So sometimes you guys got better ideas than me, because I kind of look at everything subjectively. And I don't really, look at it in the way that other people would look at, prison. So somebody come up with a great idea. They wanted me to talk about smoking in prison and when they took the tobacco. And it was a crazy time in prison when they took the tobacco. And when I seen the person's comment, I was like, wow, that's an amazing story, because there was so much drama over tobacco in jail that it's shocking and people want to know about that. And how I first will explain it is, when I first got to prison in 1996, you could buy cigarettes in the commissary. They were $1 something a pack. They were cheap. It was no federal tax. And there was a limit on packs of cigarettes you could buy. I think you could buy 10 a week. And I think at the same time, you could also buy Bugler. They're like $1. It was like $1.90 a pouch. So tobacco is very cheap in prison. And it was everywhere. You could smoke everywhere. You could smoke when I got to prison, you could smoke everywhere but the chow hall. You could even walk with a cigarette in the center hall and smoke. It was the craziest thing in the whole world. I thought it was so insane. But about a year after I was in prison, they started to minimize the areas where you could smoke. Like, now, the first step was you couldn't smoke going down Center Hall, going to the chow hall. There's areas of the prison that's called Center Hall, where all the activity is, where everybody comes out of the units and kind of meet in one place, and it's like the highway for the whole prison. So you couldn't smoke there no more. People were smoking like in the units just before they were getting ready to, leave the unit, exit the unit. They would smoke, and then there'd be ashtrays right there. So you couldn't smoke in the areas where everybody congregated. You could smoke in your unit. So I'll give you an example. There was, in Leavenworth Penitentiary, there was A1 on the first floor. Second floor was A2, where Kessler was at. And the third floor was A3, where I lived. So in them stairwells, you could smoke. You could smoke down on, the very first floor, where you would come out and merge into, the prison's highway, right? You could smoke right at the mouth of that door. Then, after that, after you couldn't smoke, now you couldn't smoke in the hallways. You can only smoke in your unit. Of course, everybody smoked in the hallways. They were doing this as a way to kind of shape your response to smoking. So that came out to be that you could only smoke in the units. Now, after the units, you could only smoke in your cell. You couldn't smoke outside on the tiers. You couldn't smoke, outside in the unit. You could always smoke outside in the yard. There was electric lighters in the yard. We had matches at the time. So you could always smoke in the yard. When you were outside, you could always smoke. Now, the ultimate step that they made was you could only smoke in your cell. Now, they put out a memorandum saying, you can go buy cigarettes at the store, but after a certain date, and I forget exactly what it was. I can look through my paperwork and find out exactly when it was. But there became a certain date where it was no longer acceptable to smoke anywhere except outside. So they did give you that option that you could have a smoke break. I think I was in Petersburg. I was in Petersburg Medium. Yes, Petersburg Medium, when they stopped it completely and said, hey, listen, you can't smoke in the unit no more. You can only smoke outside. And they took all the matches. They took everything. They were shaping everybody to stop smoking. Everybody knew it was coming. So the last and final step was you could only smoke outside, and they had an electric lighter underneath the shack called the smoke shack. It was just 4 beams, metal beams with a metal roof. And you could go out there at during a move. Then after the move, the last move was recall at 8:45 at night. And at 8:55 at night, it was the last smoke break. They would let you outside to smoke for 10 minutes, right? Then you would have to come in and you couldn't smoke. Of course, people smoked in their cells. You could get in trouble for it. It was no longer acceptable. But people went outside and smoked. Then I remember, now it's coming back to me really as I tell it, that there was a memorandum that came out and that said after a certain date, no longer acceptable to smoke anywhere in federal prison. And they gave you this date, which was 6 months in advance, say. And they said, we're still selling tobacco for another 3 months. So they sold tobacco for another 3 months. Then they stopped selling tobacco in the commissary. You couldn't buy it no more. And then they gave you 3 months that after you could still have it, but after a certain date, everything became contraband. So, in other words, you could stock up as much as you want and buy it and put it somewhere, But now, the rule was still, the policy was still in place that you could only have 10 cases, 10 packs of cigarettes. Like you could have a crate. We used to call them crates, the cartons, right? We used to call them crates in the joint. And then some packs of Bugler. There was a certain amount, like 3 packs of Bugler, 10 packs of cigarettes. You could have that. Every inmate could possess that and not have excessive property. They might not give you a shot for that, but they might confiscate it if you have too much of something. And then they give you a confiscation chip that you broke the rules and regulations. This is why. Sometimes it could end up with a shot, depending. A shot means, we've already been through this, a disciplinary report. They can write you an infraction. You can get in trouble for it. So this is where the best part of the story comes in. What happened when they stopped selling tobacco? They stopped it. You could still possess it. You could still smoke outside on the smoke breaks. And they gave you, this is the last smoke break we're going to have. Is, say, for instance, October of 2005, 2006. I was in Petersburg when it happened. No, I think I was in Lee. No, let me see. I went to Lee County. Went to Petersburg. I was in Lee County because I went from Leavenworth to Petersburg to Lee County. And Lee County was the last time that we could smoke. So what happened at Lee County was insanity. People got these brainstorms that, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to stock up on tobacco, and then when it becomes illegal, contraband, I'll sell it for double the price, right? Simple. When you made tobacco a commodity, people started to get rich. Even like offices bring tobacco in. It's against policy. It's not against law, right? It's not like you're bringing heroin in. So the first step of this process started everybody, like a lot of people, not everybody, of course. I didn't smoke. I wasn't interested in it. I ran a ticket. That's how I made my money in prison. People started stocking up on tobacco. And now you had to stash it somewhere, right? So people started finding stash spots. Now, a lot of these stash spots were in individual cells. So say, for instance, I had a cell and I bought, 60 packs of Bugler. I was buying them from this guy. I was giving people money to go to the store, and I was accumulating, Bugler tobacco, just the packages, blue packages that the brand name was Bugler, right? They had top Bugler, but Bugler was like the best of the worst type of tobacco, right? It was cheap, came with papers, you roll them yourself. But people were trying to find stash spots for all this tobacco. What ended up happening was you would have like plumbers, guys from construction, inmates that worked, in the facilities department that, maintained the institution wherever you were at. I happened to be at Lee County Penitentiary, which was a pretty rough place anyway. People got down, there was fights and stuff. It was the highest security level in the feds. But people started to use their own cells as stash spots. So what people would do, like one of the biggest moves, like I remember in Schuylkill, I heard the story where they took home plate on the softball field and put like 10 pounds of tobacco under there. And they were fighting, hitting each other with bats afterwards. The biggest wrecks I've ever seen in jail were over people stashing tobacco. So one move in Lee County Penitentiary was, and now you'll know if you were at Lee County Penitentiary at this time, that this is the truth and it's crazy, right? People were we had these tables, metal tables in the cell. And when I say tables, you're going to get the interpretation that, or you're going to get the vision in your head that it's a table. It's not. It's a table that's about this big, as wide as where I'm sitting. It's metal. It's bolted to the wall, but it has hollow legs and a hollow top around or the side around the top. So say this is the top of the desk right here, the top, right? It had a little thing around it that was hollow, and all the legs were hollow. So what people started to do was get their friends from facilities, or if they worked in facilities, if they worked in maintenance, take the tables off, have somebody keep the peak for the cop, keep the peak from other people, and just like try to put the towel up, or just like, hey, you know what I'm saying? Like, you know, just kind of shoo people away. And kind of people knew what was going on insofar as they knew when people didn't want company and when people were up to something. You didn't want to see what they were up to because if, you know, don't tell me anything I got to remember to forget. So, you know, people would kind of just shy away if you gave, you know, if you gave like the signal, like, you know, like you just was like, hey, you know, not now. So people would be in there with the fucking tools moving around, and they would take the tables off, stash all the tobacco up in the hollow legs. Okay? Ingenious, right? Then you get your friend to take it off and sell tobacco, right? Not that easy, right? You would think in a perfect world everything goes easy, right? It's not your cell, right? When you live there, it's your cell, of course. But what happens is some people go to the hole. Now, some people are smart and stayed in the same cell because they know, like, hey, I can't get into no wrecks. I'm sitting on fucking $20,000 worth of tobacco over here. You know what I'm saying? Legitimately. People at the end was, you know, you could buy a pack of Bugler for $1.10 and you could make like 50 cigarettes out of it. At the end, what I seen was in those higher security places, you could sell a cigarette for $10. $10 for a cigarette. It was astronomical money. More money than heroin. You know, many people quit. That was the smart thing to do, right? Just quit smoking. I remember on the last smoke break, I went out and smoked a Tiparillo. Just as like, you know, an ode to the smoking time in prison. I hated smoke. I don't like secondhand smoke, but you know, I can't tell nobody how to live their lives in prison. You know, I choose to try to maybe move with a non-smoker. If I lived in a cell and there was smoking allowed in cells, obviously I would choose a non-smoker to live with. And he would choose me because I'm a non-smoker. But I went out and I smoked the Tiparillo and I was like, hey, this is the last time anybody's ever going to smoke in federal prison legally, right? So I just kind of went out and it was just kind of an ode to something that had been happening in federal prison forever. Now, don't forget, a big aspect of this was tobacco was always money in prison. Instead of the green dollar bills you have in your pocket, hundreds, packs of cigarettes was money. That's how, you know, that was the system of capital. You know, we attached value to packages of cigarettes, crates of cigarettes. We attached a certain value and we honored those values, right? Because what is money? Money's only paper. Just we attach value to it, right? It's the same paper you can get in a lot of other places, right? We just happen to attach value because of the makeup of it. And it's money. We know it's the monetary system. We understand that. You know, it's kind of a base level look at, you know, a very complicated process, right? But, I mean, if rocks, you attach value to rocks, then rocks would be the money system. But we attach value to cigarettes. Afterwards, when cigarettes were out of circulation, you could still barter. Like if you had tobacco, it was worth money, and you could barter it with certain people. It was, I didn't want it, you know, but other people did. And we came up with an entirely different money system after that, you know. We all came together and, you know, kind of figured it out, what it was. But getting back to the stashing of tobacco is you think it's a great idea until you go to the shoe, right? You go to the hole. Sometimes, you know, when you get out, so when you leave a cell, if I'm living, me and my bunkie are living in a cell, and say, for instance, they find a knife in the cell, they find contraband, whatever you want to say it is, you know, I always used to say, you want to kill your bunkie? Why would you keep a knife in the cell? It's the stupidest thing, right? You always have a stash vault where to have one. My stash vault was the best place in the whole prison when I was in Lee County. We had a fire escape sign right outside my door, and we had a scalpel behind it. It was, how we got the scalpel is a whole nother story. It's insanity. But we had one right, all you had to do was rip the sign off, it would fall. thank God we never needed it. Me and my bunkie, BB, from Iowa. Shout out to Jamie BB. I love BB. Get in touch with me, BB. I want to holler at you. So we had a good stash bar for our knife. Like, we ain't trying to kill each other in the cell, right? So why would we get ourselves in trouble, But if you, for instance, did have a knife or you did have some contraband in your cell, cops come in, they shake down, they find the knife. You both get locked up immediately. But there's no, interrogations. They'll interrogate you for other things to try to get information on people, but you're getting handcuffed. It doesn't matter what you say. You can call the president. You're going to the box. They find contraband in your cell, and they're like, hey, this is contraband that's dangerous. You're going to the box. They'll just come looking for you, say, hey, come here, hands behind your back. What's up? What's going on? Nothing. Just let's go. Take you to the lieutenant's office, take you to the hole, lock you up, and then they talk to you after you're locked up. So now, say you and your bunkie go to the hole, and you got 150 packs of bugler in the desk, and just say you and him know about it, right? Now somebody moves into that cell, right? There's certain standards and there's certain protocols for cells. There's certain, in certain institutions, there's white cells. So 2 white dudes will maybe move in there, or a white dude will move from his bunkie and move in there, hold it down. But, it didn't always happen like that. Some people didn't honor that. Not us, of course. Convicts honored a code that the convicts honored. But sometimes the administration was like, hey, these guys have been waiting 2 months to try to get into a cell together. This guy's having... That's it. See you later. You're moving in the cell. So let's just say that happens. You and your bunkie leave, go to the box, 2 people move in. You got all this tobacco, even if they don't know. Now, what happens is people start talking. Oh, man, that's so-and-so's cell. Man, he bought all that tobacco. Then he had dude come up and move it. People start talking, right? Now people are trying to get it. Now they're trying to maneuver. Oh, man, now everybody starts talking. Takes on a life of its own. So you can imagine at the end of the day what happens in those situations, right? Of course, people are trying to get the tobacco. Of course, when people try to steal from people, ultimately there's violence. I remember the one time I was sitting on my bed in a chair, okay? And my chair had a little window right next to it. And I had a mirror on my window, so I would be looking out my window from right here, and the mirror would show me all the way up the walkway, all the way to the lieutenant's office. That was like my rear view mirror. I just put 2 mirrors on my window, little magnetized mirrors, so I could see what was going on behind me outside. And if not, I would just be looking at a straight wall. But now with the mirrors, I could see my courtyard, I could see that wall, and I could see all the way behind me. So I remember what had happened was, I know the story, of course, that somebody had moved into a cell where somebody stashed tobacco. And person gets out of the hole and says, hey, I got to get in there and remove that table. I got to get something. The dude's like, nah, man, you ain't moving nothing. My boy's coming up here with tools, That's, And they were like, so they fought over whose tobacco there was. That ain't yours, man. There was other dudes in here. Dude left. Dude tell me I could have it. You know what I mean? It got into this whole controversy. So I remember there was a cop in the yard, like some maintenance cop, dressed in gray, because that was the cops that worked maintenance. And he was in the courtyard, and dudes were like, yeah, I got to go up to the cell. And the dude's like, hey, listen, we got to go over to another block. I remember hearing them outside a little bit. I could hear, because you can't open a window. You could just hear a little bit what they're talking about. We got to go to another unit. The cop's like, listen, I'm going to this unit. Go do what you got to do. You got 10 minutes. So both of these guys are kind of running up to the cell. This other guy's up there, and they both had tools in their hands, and they just started beating each other with tools after the controversy couldn't get adjudicated. It was sick. It was sick. And that's one fight. Dude was hitting dude with a hammer. Dude had because you got tools. You got to check them out with your boss. It's a penitentiary. It's a dangerous environment anyway, but your boss is supposed to stay with you when you have the tools. But sometimes the boss will let check the tools out, take the tools, you go do a job. The boss can't be at 7 units at once, right? So say, for instance, you got a plumbing boss, and there's 3, crews doing 3 different toilets that are broken. They take the toilet off the wall. You might have to sail the thing, whatever the case may be is. So inmates sometimes have tools. And of course, at the end of the day, everybody has to check every single tool, and every single chit that is out on a tool has to be accounted for. If there's one tool missing, the whole facility gets locked up. Everybody goes to the shoe until that tool turns up. And if not, you stay in the shoe. Make that tool turn up. You know, because that's just a safeguard against nobody having tools. Anyway, this day, these guys got tools in their hands. They're going to get tobacco. They're going to take a table off the wall, and they start beating each other with tools. One guy had a monkey wrench. I think one guy had a hammer and a crowbar. Because, you know, sometimes you got to move toilets off the wall. So we have murder weapons in our hands, you know. And, you know, that set off a whole bunch of other events in jail that, you know, those were the tobacco wars. And that was a time in prison when I was at Lee County that I termed the tobacco wars, because people were beefing about tobacco. That's why I sell no, you know, because you start the whole process saying, oh, I'm going to stash this here. Perfect, right? Now somebody finds your stash spot. Now it's a problem. Who took this? What happened? You know, then, and when money's involved, you know, gets to be a problem, especially if you're in a cell, you get kicked out. Now you're sending kites. Yo, tell that dude I got something in the cell. Now the dude's like, what do you got in the cell? You know, so it just turned into a whole nightmare. People lost their minds over tobacco, and there was a lot of beefs, tobacco wars. I've heard about a lot of them. I heard about Schuylkill Medium with, you know, my friend Ryan Vargas, who I love to death, and his brother Tommy. I heard about them they buried, you know, tobacco on the home plate on the Schuylkill softball field. And there was people were, you know, fighting about, no, I sat, but there was a big, huge beef, Boston against somebody else. And the tobacco wars were crazy. So that's what the federal government does, right? And especially in jail. They created a commodity just by tobacco. Just think about the money. Just think about this. You could roll 50 cigarettes out of a pouch. Say 25. I didn't smoke. You know, I might have smoked for 2 months in prison. You know? So just think if you can roll 25 cigarettes, right? Nice ones, nice cigarettes, good-sized cigarettes. So say cut that in half and you can roll 50 small ones and sell them for $10 a piece. Think about the money think about the ability to derive capital from that. And you can't keep it. You can't keep tobacco. When you bring tobacco in, even in the camp, when I was in Schuylkill camp, I brought in a couple crates of cigarettes just on a Hummer, you know what I'm saying? And I give them to a guy and you come back with the money in a day. I'm like, really? It's a big commodity. Tobacco is a big commodity. And, I droned on long enough, but the tobacco wars were a wild, wild time. Now you can't get cigarettes anywhere in prison unless they're brought in by somebody. An officer, maybe you can find a way to get them in. I don't know. What do I know? But the tobacco wars were crazy. But listen, keep commenting on this stuff and keep giving me ideas of what to talk about. This was a great idea that somebody had, and they commented on, and they're like, hey, what about tobacco? And I was like, oh, great topic. I could talk for 2 hours about it. It's a great topic, even just about, just changing the monetary system. But the tobacco wars in federal prison, interesting times, to say the least. Follow this, subscribe to this, share this channel with your friends. If you like it, share it with your friends. And let me know what you want to hear about, and I'll do it. Thanks for watching.